Welcome, everyone. I apologize. We're going to start, I guess, right at 5:15. Unfortunately, we have a hard stop tonight. My name is Kurt Wilson, a resident of Brookfield, mayor of Roswell, and it is a great honor and privilege. This is our 10th of 10 public bond meetings, so I can't think of a better place to end it than here at Brookfield. So tonight is a road show on the bonds. You probably know that there is an election coming up a week from today. And the elections is usually focused around the national stuff and the state stuff. But as most of you here probably know, it's the local stuff that really matters a lot of times to us. And so one of the things that this council came in and did was when beginning to identify priorities, identify strengths, identify weaknesses, and ask the staff over a period of about 6 months to come up and identify areas of need. And one of the things we're going to do some quick presentations, first on Parks and Rec, then on Police and Fire, then on the parking garage. So three general bond questions are going to be before you next Tuesday if you haven't already voted. The first question on the ballot, general obligation bond, is $107.6 million for recreation and parks. It's broken into 3 different pieces of expenditures. The second question before you is $52 million for police and fire. It is broken overwhelmingly into fire with $20 million for public safety. There'll be a short presentation on that by Joe and Jim and Lee. And the third question is $20 million for a parking tech, and that'll be introduced to you by Peter Vanstrom, who I anticipate being in here in a minute, and Daryl Connolly, our Economic Development Director, who I anticipate being in here in a minute. But they're last anyway. So without further ado, I'm going to beg your indulgence. Welcome, Peter. We're just talking about you. This is Dr. Peter Vanstrom. Say hi, everybody. He's awesome. I'm going to beg your indulgence. Let us do the presentations as quick as possible. Please write down any questions that you have, and then we'll come back and answer questions, and any and all questions. This is to impart as much information as we possibly can to you. Thanks so much, and with that, I'm going to turn it over to Christine and to Jeff.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you all for being here. I am stepping in tonight for our William Morthland, who is our liaison to Parks and Rec, and I will do the best I can to introduce a little bit of the information, then turn it over to Director Leatherman. But Councilmember Morthland starts with the story, and the story is how he ended up in Roswell. A few years ago, they were living in Birmingham, Alabama, and his wife basically got an opportunity to transfer to Emory. So what did they start doing? They didn't start house shopping, but he tells the story that they started city shopping. So they looked in Decatur, they looked in Vinings, Sandy Springs, Alpharetta, and they settled on Roswell. And why did they settle on Roswell? Because Roswell is special. Everything that Roswell has to offer, bordered on 3 sides by the Chattahoochee River, the parks and recreation, all of the amenities, and that's basically what it's about. Roswell is something special to all of us, and Parks and Rec is a major component of that. So with that, I don't do the story justice as Will does, but I will turn it over to Director Leatherman to go through the bond.
As Christine said, and Councilmember Hall said, $107.6 million is broken down in question number 1. And really that is broken up into 4 different distinct categories that I'll run through really quick and talk about some of our philosophies and background of how we built out that budget recommendation. We'll talk about the River Parks investment, about $25 million of that total sum. The park investments of our existing parking facilities, about $62 million. Bike and pedestrian improvements along with sidewalks, about $20 million. And that makes up the $107 million total. A lot of these plans, specifically around the river parks, have been in the works for really about 5 or 6 years. Since 2016, this community has adopted the River Parks Master Plan as our vision for investment down along the river. The reality is over the last few years, 5 years or so, there has not been a lot of movement of actual investment into those parks and into those facilities down along the Chattahoochee River. If you look back at the 2016 master plan and the 2018 economic impact study associated with that plan, you'll see roughly about $35 million worth of investment identified in order to activate that master plan. As we were going through the budgeting process and working with this mayor and council for the last 10 months, evaluating what types of investments are important, they identified, starting with the ASAN Phase 1 and Phase 2, that's $6.2 million worth of investments at that park location. If you've been around the community for a while, that's where the Threet family used to dredge along the river next to the church. That has already been funded as part of this year's budget process. So this mayor and council has already done the work of activating and investing in the River Parks Master Plan. They also made some decisions early on in looking at the multi-use facility that's identified in the River Park Master Plan and essentially put a hold on that portion of the project as we look at silt and sedimentation deposits and dredging in the river. Because we're tight on time, I'm not going to go too far into the detail around dredging, but if there's a question at the end, happy to cover that. But what that caused us to do is pause two portions of the investment, the multi-use building, and reevaluate that. And then we have the ASAN Phase 1 and Phase 2. So you pull those two items out of the budget, adjust for inflation. That's where you get the $25 million of investment for Riverside Park, Don White Park, which is where the volleyball courts are, Azalea Park, and about $1 million at the River Landing. That's where you get the total of the $25 million here at the River Park Master Plan and investing in the River Park Master Plan. Again, the reference documents associated with those are going to be your 2016 Master Plan, which is on our website, as well as the economic impact. And those are the building blocks for the budget for the investment along the river. Primarily what we're looking at there from an investment perspective, we've got a lot of non-native plants that we need to remove. We've got some riverbank restoration that we need to do along the river. And then investing in the existing infrastructure that has been there for about 25, 30, in some cases even 40 years. Rebuilding the bathrooms, rebuilding the stage and amphitheater around Riverside Park, redoing the picnic pavilions in Azalea and Riverside Park, rebuilding some of the components of Don White, fixing some of our parking circulation to expand parking where we can down along the river. All of those goals were identified in the River Parks Master Plan, and the bond structure allows for those investments to activate the River Park Master Plan. Something else that this council has already done, we continued to hear questions about, well, how fast can this be delivered? In our current year budget, above and beyond anything in the bond, mayor and council has already invested in the design of those improvements. So we've already started the work to begin the conceptual designs of those improvements so that if the bond is approved by the voters, we can roll right into construction drawings and then right into construction so that we're activating that plan quickly and as quickly as possible. The second component, as we talked about, is investing into our existing parks and infrastructure, $62 million. Early on in this mayor and council's tenure, and this goes back to about December, almost a year ago now, there's a lot of questions about what does it take to invest in our existing parks and facilities, some of which that were built in the 80s, 90s, sometimes in the 70s. If you look at Roswell Area Park, they're 20, 30, and 40 years old. We have a lot of failing infrastructure. We got a lot of failing concrete in our sidewalks. We have failing sewer lines. We have restrooms that can't just be repainted anymore. They're beyond that point. They need to be rebuilt from the ground up. They don't meet some of our ADA standards any longer. They cannot be repaired. They need to be rebuilt. That's the point that we are in the majority of our infrastructure in our larger parks and facilities. The question that this mayor and council had is, what does it take, financial investment into our existing parks and facilities in order to bring them up into 2022 standards? We adjusted our 5-year park and facilities master plan and went through an assessment of all of our parks and all of our facilities to understand what was that investment over the next 5 and 10-year horizon to bring them up into a new standard. The answer to that question of our existing parks and facilities was about $100 million over the course of the next 5 to 10 years. We reprioritized that number looking at our highest and best uses in our largest parks and facilities, and that's where this list has come from, and that's where the price breakdown has come from. East Roswell is listed first at $8.6 million, Hembry Park at $10.2, Groveway, Grimes, Waller Park, Woodstock here at $3 million, Roswell Area Park at $20, and then some additional funds for park development and future land acquisition if necessary. East Roswell Park has been a priority of this mayor and council, and it's important to point out that we have existing investments that are already happening there. Mayor and council already approved $3 million in this current year budget to tackle infrastructure improvements at that park. So when you take this $8.6 million, add 3 on top of that current investment, all related to infrastructure in the parks and facilities. And what does that mean for us? When you look at all of these, we're looking at same thing I talked about on the river. How do we build from the ground up? What's our wastewater system look like? What does our drainage systems look like? We just got done relooking at the tennis courts down in East Roswell Park. And what we found before we were rebuilding the tennis courts is the support wall that those tennis courts are built on is actually eroding from underneath the tennis courts. We've got to go back in and rebuild that wall before we can build the tennis courts on top of it. That's the same experience that we have in a lot of areas in our parks and facilities. Facilities that are 20 and 30 and 40 years old have failing infrastructure underneath them. We've got to rebuild those parks from the ground up and put ourselves on a new trajectory that we can use those parks for the next 20, 30, and 40 years like we have before. As you look at East Roswell Park, Waller Park, Woodstock, and Roswell Area Park, the other question that we have is our synthetic fields. For those of you that have sports players in your family, we have 4 boys, all the way from high school down to 4th grade. Spend a lot of time in our parks, a lot of time in our facilities. You will see that our synthetic fields have run their useful life. You start to see the seams that will split. You start to see areas that have been repaired time over time. A couple of weeks ago, one of my kids was out playing on one of our soccer fields and had to actually flip the synthetic turf back over because it had peeled back in order for him to play over the top of it. Those fields have reached their useful life. About 10 years is about how long they'll last. This bond has all of the financial provisions to replace the synthetic turf fields in all of our parks and facilities. It also has some financial provisions to consider Woodstock Park for those that have younger kids that play in our soccer programs. You will find, and if you're out there over this weekend or you happen to drive by, just take a look. Those fields are done for the season. We'll continue to use them, but we play north and south and east and west on those fields, which means they last about 2 to 3 months at the very most before they start to fail, meaning that we'll start to see the goal boxes wear out to bare dirt. You'll start to see the traffic patterns in the middle. We essentially use those fields too much for the amount of kids that play on them. And so we are considering, as part of a future conversations, budget provisions to transfer those fields into synthetic. We also saw in our park master plan that a skate park is needed and desired by the community. It was one of our number one request in our 5-year park master plan. We have provisions in the budget for East Roswell Park. There's some future decisions on where that will go, but we do have financial provisions to be able to put that into one of our parks here in the city of Roswell. Any pickleball players? Yes, pickleball, my pickleball people. It's awesome. We love pickleball. We do not have enough pickleball courts anywhere in the community. That is, I'm with you. We have provisions at East Roswell. We're also looking at Grimes and Groveway to fit some additional pickleball courts as part of this bond. That was also in our 5-year park master plan. Skate park and pickleball, top 2. And so mayor and council have included future financial provisions in the bond to construct those. For those of you that enjoy trails in our facility, when you look at our top 3, we round those out in our 5-year park master plan for really the last 20 and 30 years. We've continued to develop trails in our community. 7 Branches is the connection on East Roswell, the 55 acres that we own along Holcomb Bridge Road. We will connect that trail through the center of that park. We have some repairs to Big Creek Boardwalk Trail. Oxbow Trail connection, which is the sewer pipe crossings down behind Waller and Groveway Community Park that will connect into the top of the covered bridge in the waterfall area. So essentially you could walk up the trail for any of you that have been to the waterfall or the old dam. If you walk up to the end of that trail, it essentially just dead ends into the creek. This project allows that portion of the trail to be connected by 2 bridges. You'll be able to walk all the way up to Oxbow and then potentially connect into downtown Kansas Corridor or City Hall. And then the Smith Plantation Trails is trail improvements along Smith Plantation, connecting the trails behind City Hall, Smith Plantation, from Hill Street over to Norcross. As we talk, the third component, about $20 million. I look forward to working with our new transportation director as we look at our sidewalk gaps, sidewalk connectivity, and multi-use trail connectivity. So when you think about my department versus transportation, anything that's within the right-of-way falls to transportation. 8 to 10 foot wide multi-use trails and sidewalks in the right-of-way are fit within the $20 million investment. Anything that's a trail outside of the right-of-way, like I talked about before, Seven Branches, Big Creek, that falls to my department. We have provisions for trail improvements both on a transportation level as well as a recreation and park level within the $107 million. I know that I'm moving a little quickly because we're tight on time. That is the component that I have. I'm going to turn it back over to Councilmember Hall, and then we're going to transition into question number 2.
Actually, we can probably.
Want you to do that?
So very quick overview on the Parks and Recreation Bond, $107.6 million. 3 components, $62.9 million of that is basically to rebuild parks, existing parks. $25 million, or 24% to be more specific, is for phases 3, 4, 5, and 6 of the River Master Plan. And $20 million of that is to be appropriated towards the Bike and Pedestrian Master Plan. That's the $107.6 million quick overview on question 1 on the ballot, $107.6 million for the Park and Recs bond. The second question on the ballot is $52 million for police and fire. And I love making fun of our police chief and fire chief for lots of good reasons. One is because they're incredibly competent men. One of the things that we've said about our city internally and have talked about things that's ironic for us is that our city is 100,000 people. But when you get into the mechanics of it and you look at a lot of the decision making that's happened in the past, it's though we were a 10,000 person town. And so one of the things we said that a challenge to us is to operate with the efficiency and competence and organizational structure of a 1 million person town, not the bureaucracy, but bring the competence, efficiency, and overall competence of an organization like that, to literally flip the switch. And the reason I share that with you is because we have in a fire chief and in a police chief men who have incredible competence and have led very large organizations. Jim Conroy, our police chief, ran DeKalb County, had 1,200 badges. So we really are very blessed to have men of this caliber and this high level of organizational ability in our city to lead us. So with that, I would like to introduce my friend and champion of police and fire, Councilmember Lee Hills.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you all. I am Lee Hills, and I am delighted to be the liaison, the council member liaison for police and fire, for public safety, also for administration and governance. But tonight we're talking about public safety. So right out of the gate, when this mayor and council was sworn in January, we'd already been having conversations about public safety and a myriad of other things. But it was unanimous that we would get on board and behind our public safety servants, really. And it was just not even a question. It was how much and how do we do it. So as you know, we implemented a best-in-class pay for our police force, a 20% increase right out of the gate. Thanks to our creative, not illegal, creative expert Ryan Luckett in our finance department, we were able to make that happen, and it sent ripples throughout the north end of Fulton County and some of our neighboring counties. And we'll get to Chief Conroy in just a minute. I'm going to draw on the experts here, but tell you just a little bit before. With our fire department, the reason this bond question is so important is to back up a minute with our parks discussion. I feel like, and I know, that we've got a lot of deferred maintenance in our parks and rec, and that's a separate topic and a separate bond question. But we have what I call ignored maintenance in our public safety. We've got old fire stations. We've got dilapidated accommodations inside. I want to talk about safety. We've got safety issues within our fire department, in our fire stations, not the department itself, but within the fire stations. A couple built in the 70s, one in the 40s. It is way past due. We have one that looks really good and one that's pretty good that needs relocation. So it's time. As you know, we have also, within our fever to get things done with public safety, we are moving to a 5-year plan of moving our fire department to full-time. We're the biggest city, maybe in the United States, but anywhere we can find with a part-time fire department. It's way past due. Past administrations have acknowledged it needs to happen, and we are cashing the check that previous administrations have verbally written. So it's time for us to get with it on that. We've got problems with our fire trucks not being able to pull in from the back to nose out to get out. That's a safety issue. The accommodations, you'll see Chief Panino will run through some of that. Something I do want to point out, and I do want this back. Police Chief Conroy really wants this, so I'm keeping my eye on him. But this is a key from the police department across from City Hall, and it's dated 1992. So that's 30 years ago when that was built, when we were 48,000 people strong. We now have an east side of Roswell, and we're over 96,000 people here in the city. So you can just imagine, and Chief Conroy will elaborate on that a little bit. But it's time for us to up our game. It's time for us to provide for them what they need in order to serve us and protect us while doing their job safely. So we are putting out there on this bond question a public safety headquarters, which will house the police, the fire, and our E911. That I think that's living proof right there that it's way past due to get with it. And with that, I'm going to ask Fire Chief Panino to come up and talk a little bit more in detail about what we've got on this bond. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Councilmember Hills. Thank you. As Councilmember Hills mentioned, I'm Joe Panino, and I've had the pleasure of serving as your fire chief for almost a year and a half now. Yeah, no one claps for me. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you. Hey. Huh? All right. Yeah. I'll be quick because Jeff took all my time. So when I got here, I had the pleasure of using an agency to do a deep dive into the fire department, to look at everything from our operations to our fire stations to how we deploy resources, our staffing model. That company was called the Center of Public Safety Management. So one of the things they looked at was that part-time staffing model. As Councilmember Hills talked about, the part-time model means all of our firefighters work for one of 21 other fire departments in the metro Atlanta area full-time. When they get off shift after 24 hours, they come work here afterwards for another 24-hour shift. And that creates a lot of problems with us for staffing, fatigue, continuity, people working together all the time. It creates a problem. So with the leadership of this mayor and council, today we have 21 full-time fire captains in orientation with us here. And that's a big deal for us. It's very historic for the city of Roswell. That ensures that all 7 fire stations, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, we have full-time supervision, and we're going to continue to build off of that. The other thing that CPSM looked at was our capital, so our fire stations. On the left, it's kind of bleached out here, but on the left you can see our current 7 fire stations, and the red indicates 1.5 miles drive distance from each station, and that's what ISO, the Insurance Services Office, looks at for our fire insurance ratings for the city, how well we protect the city from fire loss. Where there's not red, those are the gaps that we have in service. On the right is where CPSM recommended moving, or in some cases adding, a station to kind of shore up those gaps and improve our coverage. And one of the stations that they recommended adding was Station 28, which would serve the area that we're at now, everything from here west to the Cobb County line. And they indicated that was a gap in service. So the projects for 23, 22, and 26, those have actually been proposed as potential bond projects at the city since 2015. So those aren't new, but we'll go through all of them. Fire Station 21 is on Highway 9. It was built in 1948 as either a car dealership or a service station. I wasn't here then, but you can see the picture of it on the top. The city bought it in 1980. It's been through several remodels and kind of repurposed, but the issue is it wasn't built as a fire station. So all the modern infrastructure, the radio systems, the encoder systems, the private bunk rooms, being able to do a drive-through to go into the station from the back and then respond out to the front, there's not anything we can do to really change that. And CPSM recognized this station should actually be further south to better serve the southwest area of the city. Fire Station 22 is on Houseway and Crabapple. That station was built in 1975 when the fire department was an all-volunteer fire department. So it's got less than 1,500 square feet of living space in it. There's a big problem, as Councilmember Hills mentioned, when they return back from a call, they have to shut down Crabapple Road to back into the station. And I can't fit anything bigger than an engine in that station. So when I, as the fire chief, want to redeploy our resources, ladder trucks, I'm limited because I can't fit a ladder truck into that fire station. It's just too small. And the station wasn't built to be occupied 24 hours a day. It's only got one bathroom for the entire crew, does not have private sleeping quarters, and I'll show you some inside pictures of the station here in a minute. And the parcel is just too small. It's about 0.6 acres, so there's really not anything we can do to rebuild on that location. And again, CPSM for response time shows that station needs to be moved a little further north. This is Fire Station 23. It's kind of a sister station built in 1977. The floor plan's about the same. The difference is we have a little bit bigger, a much bigger parcel that we can work on. So we could actually rebuild this station on site, have private quarters on the parcel, move the engine to the southern part of the parcel, and rebuild that station where it sits, just more modern and bigger to meet our needs. Some of the issues we have with infrastructure, we had a sewer line go out at this station over the summer. We'd spent like $4,500 getting it repaired. It just went out again. A couple weekends ago, we had to get an emergency plumber out there. And the problem with the sewer line now is the part that's under the foundation. So we have to contemplate digging up the foundation to fix it. It's just aged. So we got it on a kind of a improved maintenance cycle to try to keep the sewer line clear as we figure out what the next steps are. And this is the inside of these fire stations. The top left is the kitchen. Not much room in there. It's kind of an efficiency kitchen. Again, not built to be inhabited 24 hours a day. No room for a dishwasher. And then on the bottom left and the top right, you can see the apparatus bay. When I talked about how tight it was and we couldn't fit a fire truck in there, we can just barely fit the engine. And then on the bottom middle and the bottom right is the sleeping quarters. So this was once an open bunk room. We put some plywood, some wood walls up to try to provide some separation, but it doesn't do much if you're a snorer. You're gonna be up all night. There's not much separation there. And this is Fire Station 27 on the far southeast side of the city. And you can see it's about a quarter mile from the Gwinnett County line and from the Sandy Springs border. Not in a great spot, all the way out here on the edge of the city. And we have this big area here that's kind of underserved. Same way we do here around Station 28. So the station is not terribly old. It was built in 2002. Unfortunately, it's never going to be in the correct location where it sits right now. We actually have a fire engine from Sandy Springs, Engine 55, running with us out of that station as they are building their new fire station in the Sandy Springs Panhandle. And this is our Emergency Operations Center in City Hall. It is a converted meeting room, so it is not purpose-built as an emergency operations center. And this is the room that we go to when we have a regional disaster or something that impacts the city for a long period of time. So all of the directors that are here tonight will go and operate out of this room for an extended period of time. This is actual picture of our partial activation during Winter Storm Izzy last year. So again, we didn't have very many people in here, but the room's already full. We've got some infrastructure issues here as well. We can't transmit out of this room with our portable radios to talk to our firefighters or police officers in the field. We have no sleeping quarters, so typically you'd work 12 hours on and 12 hours off, and you can't go home when you're off because most of the time the streets are impassable. You're staying where you're working, and you need places to shower and prepare food and all those other things. So as we talk about, as Chief Conroy talks about the public safety headquarters, this definitely comes into play. And this is our fire headquarters out off Hembry Road in Alpharetta. We occupy the bottom floor of the transportation building. We moved out there about 15 years ago or so, and we're just kind of built out. As you can see in the top left, we have some offices now that are double occupancy. We have 2 people working in office. The top right is we've started to put some cubicles in our lobby because we've run out of room for people to work. The bottom left and the bottom right, when I got here about a year and a half ago, those were storage closets. So there was copy room, copy paper. We moved all that stuff out and put people in there. And then the bottom middle is our fire marshal's office. So what you see there is essentially 5 workstations. And we just don't have anywhere else to put people. And it also causes a lot of problems with our ability to collaborate and work with the police department and our 911 center. And I'll let Chief Conroy talk a little more about that.
All right, thank you, Joe. I'll try to keep us on time, sir. Applause for the fire chief, please. So I'm proud to tell you that I've been your police chief. This is now my 4th year serving the city of Roswell. Prior to my starting here, the prior police chief, prior 911 director, prior mayor, and city council recognized the need for a new 911 communication center. The 911 communication center is the lifeline between the citizens and public safety. When you need police and fire and EMS to respond, 911 is that critical hub. 4 years ago, they recognized the need for that, started the planning and design phases. 4 years later, we are no closer to creating that 911 center. Funding has been elusive. Earlier this year, we were awarded $1 million in special project funding from the federal government. So that's one step. A standalone 911 center would be about $6.5 million. So that $1 million doesn't get us there. It's critical that we have a functioning 911 center. Councilmember Hills mentioned the police headquarters. We've been there about 30 years. 30 years ago, Roswell was a very different place, a smaller population. We had 88 police officers. Today we have 160. We also have 50 civilian employees, most of which work in that 911 communication center. We are bursting at the seams. We're in the same position fire is for lack of office space. Parking is abysmal. Most of my civilian employees park across the street at City Hall and walk over, which on a night like tonight is wonderful, but in a few weeks when it's dark, raining, that is not ideal for those employees to have to walk back and forth to their cars 4 times a night. So the need for a new police station is apparent. Some of the efficiencies, if we have a co-located public safety headquarters, whether it be a building, a facility, or a campus, where fire, police, 911, emergency operations center could be in that same building, same campus, there's many efficiencies. You have efficiencies for security, efficiencies for technology, and efficiency for emergency services. As Joe mentioned, we still have to come to work, so we have to have battery backup, generator backup, air conditioning. We must have dual air conditioning systems in case one goes out, because we do have to operate 24/7, 365. Hope that was brief enough, sir. So thank you.
Thanks, Chief. Yeah, perfect. So question 2 on the ballot, $52 million, public safety for police and fire. $20 million of that $52 million is for a new public safety center, which would be for police, fire, 911, and emergency operations. $32 million of that $52 million would go for 5 fire stations, rebuilding, and 1 new one. Before I get too far, I want to also remind all of us that we do have 3 bond questions on the ballot next week. You also have a race for city council, and there are 4 Roswell residents running for that race. There is Maham Shabib, Jason Miller, Sarah Beeson, and Alan Wells. And so, Alan Sells. I got so excited because I think I see Alan. Are any of the candidates, I see Alan Sells is here. Thank you, Alan, for being with us tonight. Any other candidates with us from the city council race? So, Alan, thank you for being here. Alan Sells, not Alan Wells. I also want to say thank you that we have one of our great Georgia assemblymen, the gentleman from Alpharetta, Representative Chuck Martin is back here in the back. Thank you, Chuck, for being with us tonight. So everybody's saying thank you for Chuck. Chuck does a great job for us here in Roswell. The third question on the ballot, general obligation bond question before you, is $20 million for a parking garage. Is Daryl here? Or are you just doing this solo? So one of the neat things that this council did this year, a lot of new things. One of the things is there's never been a macroeconomic development plan. And that part is being put in process. And 2 things to get us there was, the first thing we did was we actually created an economic liaison on city council. So my friend and colleague, Dr. Peter Vanstrom, is the first economic liaison from the city council in reference to economic development. So let me introduce Peter. Peter?
Thank you very much. What a great turnout. This is so much fun. Thanks for all being here. I know you all you can hear the balls being hit, and most of you want to be down there hitting some balls, I'm sure, like me. But we are here discussing the bond referendum. And I want to take an opportunity, since we're back at Brookfield, to thank you guys for support during our previous campaign. We got a lot of support here. You supported Kurt really well, Lee, Will, and myself. We did very well on this side of town, and we really appreciate that. And we are now putting our heads down and trying to deliver on all of the things that we promised. And I can share with you the amazement as a resident when I first took office as a city council person, when I started hearing from all the different department heads what their true needs were for simple things like infrastructure. It began to look like we have a house here in Roswell that's so beautiful on the outside, but has so many problems on the inside, like you can have with your own home. And we need to turn inwards and take care of a lot of those problems if you, the voters, decide to do that. I want to clarify, we have 3 questions. We have question 1, we have question 2, and question 3. You can vote yes on either one of those, any combination of those, when you do go to the polls. Now, what I'm here to do is talk about the parking deck. And the parking deck is what we're looking at, putting a parking deck on the west side of Highway 9 in the Canton downtown area. The reason is economic development. And we've been working very hard on economic development. I think you'd be so proud of your resident and neighbor, Kurt, and Daryl Connolly, who's been doing a great job in the last 5 months. We've put together, reestablished our Downtown Development Authority for downtown. We've established a Roswell Development Authority that covers the rest of the city. Both of those entities can help greatly in economic development and redevelopment by creating financial options for developers. We have now begun master planning some different areas and nodes within the city. You're going to see a lot of public comments coming out and your invitation for public input when we look at a development that we're looking at about 75 acres at Holcomb Bridge and Highway 9. We're master planning. We've got a area at Holcomb Bridge and 400 that we're looking at master planning. We're working on right now. And we're working on what's the old Coles property near Centennial at this time. So as you can see, we have a lot of things going on. And I'll tell you, we've got a council and a mayor. I can't keep up with them. They're the most impressive group that I've ever worked with. So it's a lot of fun. So getting back to the parking deck is really to create convenient parking. The Downtown Development Authority had a study done to look at parking in the Canton area. And we have over 3,000 spaces there. But only 800 of those spaces are available conveniently to the public for parking in the Canton area and easy to find and easy to recognize. So what we're looking at is creating a conveniently located public parking deck located downtown but not on City Hall property. Construction materials will be approved by the Historic Preservation Commission. That's really important. We're going to use our Historic Preservation Society to make sure that this fits in to our historical area because the downtown area is our historical district. And we also may be seeking some private-public partnerships for this project. I know this is projected and proposed at $20 million, and you're looking at the question saying, wow, $20 million. Well, I can promise you my first priority is to try and get that cut down and reduced. One of the ways to do that is create a public-private partnership where we work with some businesses and perhaps get them involved as well. So there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of options with the parking deck. If we look at what a parking deck costs, they usually cost between $25,000 to $30,000 per parking space. We did a lot of research on existing parking decks all over the southeast, and so we're looking, people often ask, what does it really cost to build a parking deck? About $25,000 to $30,000 a space. Now, that doesn't include anything you might do on the roof, and it doesn't include if you're going to bury that first floor, some options for us. Let's see, we'll go to the next one that's a little more interesting. Talking a little bit about Canton Street real quickly. Canton Street sees 2.62 million visits annually. Put that number in your head. That's huge. 2.6 edging up to 3 million visits annually. And the folks aren't really finding the parking quite as conveniently as other cities do for them. And that's what we're trying to create, is a convenient spot where people know there's parking. It's easy to get to, easy to get out of. And the other thing that I'm hoping that it'll do is increase our retail on Canton Street. Right now, Canton Street is very heavily weighted in the restaurant area. We don't have a lot of daytime visits where people just hang out and shop. And the parking deck could bring back that ability, people finding the easiness of getting in and out. And they may stay longer than this length of stay that studies show that we have. We have 113 minutes of stay. That's dinner and a glass of wine, and that's about what you guys do when you go down and you might walk around a little bit. We want to extend that. If we can bring some more retail back, we can certainly do that. Out of those visits, we're going to see about a 10% increase annually, so that's going to grow. The interesting number about those visits, though, is 85% of those are visitors from outside of the Roswell city. And that's very important because that's revenue, sales revenue, that we're always looking for to offset our income taxes. So we want to be looking at creating something very convenient so we can have more guests to spend money in our town. These are just ideas of parking decks, things that you can do. You can put solar panels on the top. You can put parks on the top. You can combine the private partnership and have condominiums, or you can have retail built around the parking deck. All of this will become public discussion. You will all have input. If you choose to vote yes on the parking deck, we don't have the answers of exactly what we want that to be yet because we want your input. And so we'll make sure that we get that. So I'm hoping that if you guys have any questions, we can answer those for you. I know we're a little shorter on time, so I'm going to cut it a little bit shorter just like everybody else did because we do want to give you guys the opportunity to ask a lot of questions. So.
Well done, Peter. Thank you. So Peter just alluded to the fact of 3 separate bond questions. Question 1, $107.6 million for Parks and Recreation. It is a separate bond question. Question 2, $52 million for police and fire. It is a separate bond question. Question 3, $20 million for a parking garage. You can vote yes on all 3. You can vote no on 3. You can vote 1, no, yes, no, yes, 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 no, 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 yes. It's up to you. So one of the things when we ask staff for priorities and budgeting in terms of the things that needed to be done, and one of the things I left out was in Greenville, when staff and council went to Greenville in February, I can share with you that there was 113 plans from 2010 to 2021 that this city had put on the table. As Peter called it last year in the campaign, he called Roswell Plansville. And he's right, because we were really good at making plans in the city to the tune of about $7.5 million of plans that you and I spent money on. The problem was, when we went to Greenville, we said, let's take those 113 plans. We took out the redundancy of them and cut it down to about 45 plans to evaluate. Your plans, our plans. Some of them really good plans. For example, one of the ones we're asking you to consider, the River Master Plan. Because we said as a people, oh, we love this plan overwhelmingly. But the problem was, we weren't willing to bring it to you as an elected body in the past because guess what? It cost $35 million. And the reason, and by the way, if you probably noticed, you're not going to see staff or council advocate for any of these positions. But obviously, these are all investments that you're making, that we're putting on the ballot, that we think if these investments are made, they enhance the community and add value. I will tell you on the parks piece, the $62.9 million, Lee alluded to that for a minute. Jeff, just for everybody's amusement, there's a term. So your house, each one of us has a home, and you have, we'll use a business term, you have operational maintenance on it every year, right? And some of you may have $5,000, and some of you have $10,000, and some of you have $20,000. But every one of you have operational maintenance to keep your home up. And if you don't keep your home up, right, you don't spend that money, it's called deferred maintenance. And what happens when you defer the maintenance on the upkeep of your house? It's like the old Midas commercial. Some of you, most of you are much younger than me, so you probably don't remember the Midas commercial. It used to be, you can pay me now or you can pay me later. And one of the unfortunate things that we as the council and mayor have to come before you is we're the Midas down the road. This $62.9 million is paying later. We should have done this 10 years ago. I can tell you as a resident, this 62.9, another secret. Council, when they ask staff to come up with a prioritization of the expenditures that are needed for this city to get the city right, $400 million. Now, you're probably saying, why didn't you bring $400 million to us? Exactly, the same, like, oh my God, $400 million. But that's reality. The other thing, the question that the council had the wisdom to ask was, how much of this can we get done? So what you see before you in the $107.6 million on the Parks and Rec, what you see on the $52 million on the police and fire, and what you see before you on the $20 million on the parking garage. 85% of that money basically has to be in the works, spent within 36 months. So part of the questioning we asked from an operational standpoint is, can we do this? It's nice to put it out there. It's nice to say, oh, this is a great plan. The reality we asked was, can we actually get this done? And that's why it got, in our minds, it went from $400 million to basically what's before you is $180 million. 107.6, 52, and 20. I call that $180 million. That's before you to make a decision. So we have 35 minutes. That is your time to ask any and all questions that you might have about any and all things. We have a disadvantage. We have one mic. So I got to come to you. This is outside, so I know everybody wants to hear your question. So you please bear with me and indulge me, because I'm going to put the microphone right in your face when you ask the question so everybody can hear it. And I'm going to ask Randy, would you please bring the team and come back here so everybody, you can be prepared to answer the questions. So who has a question we can start with? Yes, ma'am.
What has been the thought about making Canton Street pedestrian only?
Well, how about that? Would somebody like to tackle that question? You know how much I love. Seriously, who wants? Peter, you want to attack this?
What a great idea. That's true. I think next year there's going to be some seats up for competition on council. You might want to think about running. There's actually a lot of thought going on as to what could further enhance Canton Street. What could make it even much more experiential for our guests who do come and for our residents who come to enjoy. And one of those that is discussed is actually Councilman Hall has been researching. It's Barcelona, and Barcelona's got some ways that they quarant off the areas and become much more just pedestrian friendly. So we're always looking at ideas like that. And thank you so much for mentioning that, because that's what this council and mayor are all about, is trying to make it a better place for all of you. So thanks.
Christine, do you want to add anything to that? No. Okay. Did we answer your question? Did we answer your question? No. Okay. Christine?
So to recap, the question is, will Canton Street be pedestrian only at some point? That's going to take some input from the businesses and input from the community. It's not considered as part of the bond right now, but there is a concept of Barcelona, and we actually are moving the tree lighting to the heart of Roswell Park, trying to make that area a little bit more community focused. And we're also looking at potentially moving the farmers market to that area on Saturday mornings. So perhaps those will pave the way for something like that in the future.
This is why I'm going to be the most unpopular mayor in the history of Roswell, with the council staff and with the people, because I'm going to give you a very, very brutally straight answer. This is my belief. Yes, ultimately, up to Norcross will be pedestrian only at some point. I do believe that is part of the plans. It's not a formal plan. It's not a public plan. To answer your question more specifically, that all the way to Woodstock would not be cut off. That would not be pedestrian. So but there is very serious consideration and talk inside of our planning to make it a pavilion area. And there's a lot of different talks about it. But we haven't presented it to the community. So we're giving you some information that's not part of the bond. But to answer, Canton Street would never be entirely cut off. I could see that as a very strong possibility, yes, ma'am. Obviously, there'll be a lot of people who disagree with that. Yes, ma'am.
So my question to you is, how are you going to acquire more stores within the Canton Street area? Because the reason why there's not stores in Canton Street is because the rent is so incredibly high that an average person can't do that unless you're an Abercrombie or a Gap. We don't want that. So how are you going to propose rent control or make it more advantageous for those small businesses?
Let me answer the rent control question right off the get. That will never happen as long as I'm there. There will never be rent control, ever. That's not an economic incentive. That's an economic disincentive. You ask a fantastic question because there's no retail on Canton Street, but there are a lot of pieces to that equation. And so one of the things, the bigger, larger piece of that question is a macroeconomic development plan and creating 4 economic pods. That is the very first thing that we did. 4 economic pods. The first pod is from the river up Highway 9 to the intersection of Holcomb Bridge and Highway 9. That's the first economic pod, and you're going to see where I'm going somewhere with this. The second economic pod is from Alpharetta coming down to Highway 9 to that same intersection. The third economic pod is going from that same intersection going east to Georgia 400. The fourth economic pod is coming from Gwinnett County to Georgia 400. So the first thing we did was created 4 economic pods. The second thing we did, we hired an economic development director, along with having Peter as the economic liaison. Then we brought the P3, Roswell Inc., in tow to have the long-term strategic alignment. I'm going somewhere with this. Then we activated and brought the DDA inside of our economic strategic alignment. Then we created reactivated an old development authority to help cover the other parts of the city. Then we hired the Sizemore Group, and this is where I'm going, to do intentional economic planning, because one of the problems this city has always reacted with one-off developments or one-off actions, and we get one-off, to me, lack of success stories. If you want to change the city in the long term and be in control of what it looks like, you have to have 20-year planning. So the short-term answer is probably retail is not going to go pop up on Canton Street for very simple dynamics. There's not enough traffic, right, to support retail for the most part of the kind of shops you're talking about. It's a much different experience on F&B versus retail unless you have a certain congregation of ongoing traffic patterns. We have to help develop that through the Highway 9 corridor, which is part of the plan. That's why it's part of the economic pod that we are going to master plan and develop. That's my answer to that question. Anybody else? Okay, thank you. So I can say you don't think I answered your question. Okay. And tell me how this relates to the bond for you.
Well, I'm just saying, since we're talking about an overall coverage of Roswell and bringing in more businesses and expanding Roswell, not just in a recreational or whatever, part of Roswell is supporting businesses other than just food and beverage, because that's all that's pretty much left. There used to be, back in the day, as we all know, the Chandlery and many other stores there, but the rent has just surpassed, so the only people who can afford it are people who are making and banking $100,000 plus a month on alcohol. So what is the answer to that, is my question to you.
I think the answer is long-term intentional economic planning.
That's 20 years out.
It's not, it may not be a year from now. But let me ask you a question. If you don't do it, so what would you like to, I want to make sure I understand what you're asking me.
You want me to solve your
No, you're asking me a question, so I want to make sure I understand, because you're saying, do you want us to change the dynamics of free market activity on Canton Street?
No, I'm not asking free market changing. I'm asking you what the possible equation is to help small businesses be attracted into Roswell that's other than food and beverage, who is banking a higher dollar mark per month than a clothing store or whatever.
We're in agreement with you. We're not in disagreement. We want retail activity. That's why it takes intentional planning. It doesn't just simply happen, right? You have to create the environment for it. And part of that is, that's why a parking garage, from an economic perspective,
For a long time.
yes, ma'am, that's part of enhancing the economic environment from our perspective.
Yeah, I'll just add real quickly that the study that the Downtown Development Authority did, part of that study was concluding that we're not getting as long a stay and we don't have as much retail because we don't have that convenience. and that ease of access to that area that could increase the people that want to be doing that retail. Not disagreeing with you that one of the reasons you are correct that things have shifted is the expense, but it's also shifted because of the convenience and the ease of finding the parking, and that's what that study showed. So I'm saying that's part of the equation, according to the study.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
So I just want to make sure I'm reading this correctly, because it says approval of any of the ballot questions would result in the property tax increase. So does that essentially mean if all three get approved, then it's based on your home value with those 3 additional fees? How does that work?
I'm going to let Ryan answer this question, but the numbers you have in front of you are based upon a $450,000 home, which is the median home price in Roswell. The median property tax before the rollback rate was $850 a year for a Roswell resident. It's actually going to be lower than that, but we said let's use $850. If all 3 bonds questions got passed, and you passed them, it would be about approximately $350 a year in additional property tax based upon all 3 bonds. The Parks bond is worth about $200 in additional property taxes. The police and fire is worth about $99. And the 342 is the full number, if I remember, and then $38 on parking garage. Ryan, where are you, sir? But it won't hit all at one time.
Yes, in terms of the property tax, the bonds will most likely be issued over multiple years, and so the millage rate will only need to be increased as much as has been issued. So it's most likely that your millage rate, we're estimating an increase of about 1.9 mils to fund this, and it's most likely that that increase will occur gradually over a couple of years, several years, as we issue the bonds over time. Because there is a time constraint in terms of how long we have to spend the funds, and so we want to issue as only the amount that we are certain that we can spend in a reasonable amount of time.
Real quick, I think this is a great opportunity to mention that this council reduced your millage rate prior to issuing this bond. I don't know if you're aware, but we reduced the millage rate to offset the increase in your property value, so there was no net tax increase for our citizens. We did that purposely. First, we don't believe that we should be paying any more taxes than we need to be. Secondly, we wanted to create an opportunity for you guys, the voters, to decide where your taxes are going to be going, and this bond referendum allows that opportunity for you guys to make the decision. It wasn't that we didn't sit down and go, we're going to raise your millage rate two points and have all these things taken care of, because we believe that it's good for the city. We're putting it on the voters because we believe it is the residents' decision whether or not 1, 2, and 3 are voted for, and then it includes a tax hike for the residents.
By the way, I miss the chandlery too very much. We used to go there all the time. Ma'am, did we answer your question?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, you did.
Okay, good, thank you. All right, next question. Yes, sir.
Traffic in Roswell. Okay. Especially Highway 9, Atlanta Street. They've talked for years about widening the road and reconfiguring it and stuff, and nothing's ever happened there. And also something about Holcomb Bridge, about widening that bridge. So is that something that Roswell is trying to do?
Well, we don't have 10 hours, Dave. I'm sorry. The answer is yes. None of those, and I'm not even going to put this, I would put it on Dave and Michael, but I certainly would not put it on the new transportation director. It's incredibly complex. The first project you mentioned is Gateway. And yes, this council's been working very hard on the Gateway project. The second project mentioned is something called the DDI, Diverging Diamond Interchange, which is tied to the Big Creek Parkway, which is very complicated. Previous council signed an MOU with the state, GDOT, 2019, on the DDI, which is basically expanding the Holcomb Bridge interchange in conjunction with changing the original design of the Big Creek Parkway. This council is working very diligently on what little authority they have based upon the law and based upon past signatures to work as diligently as they can to improve any and all construction projects. One of the things I can tell you is that one of the things we have not had in this city, from my perspective as a resident, is a very clear transportation plan, and that has not been clearly communicated to the ARC and to GDOT. Whereas GDOT and the ARC have clearly communicated to us is that basically we're part of a strategic cut-through program. That makes perfect sense if you have a regional approach. It doesn't make sense to me as a resident of Roswell. So obviously you see 92 and 140 where we had 250,000 cars coming through our city pre-COVID. And so one of the things that when we began to understand this is to say, there are some things that have already been done that cannot be undone. But what can we do about the things that have not been done? That's why you saw when this mayor and council came into office, the very first thing we addressed was the Oxbow Action Plan. Why? Because we really were unclear about what was the strategic intent of Oxbow. And today, honestly, as deeply as I've delved into transportation projects 10 months into it, I don't know who in the world actually knows the answer to that question. I'm serious. I mean, it's amazing. So what I will tell you was, under the limits of the law, within 90 days, this council and staff created the Oxbow Action Plan. FYI, you guys know Oxbow was a 15-year plan, that we'd spent $15.4 million on it, and we had 33% of it done. And do you know when this council came into office, the new plan was established within 90 days at the cost of $3 million and will be executed by Christmas of next year? And if you've gone by, you've probably already noticed, I always like to under-promise, over-deliver. But it will be delivered to you, our fellow residents, by Christmas of next year. And that's thanks to this council. And there was an alley, there was and by the way, that there's more traffic calming on that road there was in the previous design. One of the things you're going to see out of this staff and council is more and more traffic calming, where it's Canton Street, where it's Oxbow, whether it's Grimes Bridge. You probably heard a lot about Grimes Bridge. You're going to see more and more traffic calming. We did a test, just since we're talking about transportation. We're not talking about the bonds, and I'm sorry. Willow Springs, which is a community just like ours in Brookfield. For years, they've been fighting internally about having sidewalks. About 65% of the residents want sidewalks. About 35% of the residents don't want sidewalks. So they asked me to get involved. And I said, I don't want to get involved in your cat fight. But they forced me to get involved in their cat fight. So we brought them in. And I said, well, with all due respect, I'm going to make both parties mad. We're going to do something called poor man sidewalks. And the reason is I want to do the same thing at Brookfield whenever transportation gets to it. We repaved the streets, and we put striping in. We took the streets down from 32 feet down to 26 feet, and we created 3 feet pedestrian and bike walking lanes on both sides. Poor man sidewalks. And I can tell you is that the initial feedback on this is, knock on wood, it's an overwhelming success, without spending a lot of our money as taxpayers. So, Dave, we could be here for days talking about transportation. All right, but I know I didn't answer you. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question about the parking garage. And I believe if you look at other areas like over in Avalon and Alpharetta, they've put up parking garages that are free. So it's free parking. Is that the plan and intent for this? Because I'm not sure when you say public, private, or is it an intent to drive revenue through the parking garage? Just thinking about that as a competition to those other areas.
It's such a great question. I've got an answer, but Peter, you want to take it?
Yeah, good question. Thank you. We get that at every bond meeting we've had, and it's an obvious question: who's going to pay? We have maintenance, and we have to cover maintenance and upkeep of the parking deck when it's completed. And my hope as economic development liaison is that the taxpayers who are voting to pay for this won't be paying for it again and again and again and again. A model that many cities have is passing the cost for parking on to the businesses that have the customers utilizing the parking, and that's one option. Then there's that if you have a public-private partnership, that would be in combination with a business, and that may help offset the parking for the customers as well. But that's mainly what I anticipate being a very good discussion with the public and trying to make sure that we're not passing any future cost onto the residents of Roswell. And that's a great question. Thanks. Is that good?
That's the Alpharetta model, is a lot of cities, but that's what Alpharetta does. So basically, it's paid for by the businesses. So
The reason it's not on the ballot like that was intent to keep the question very simple. Do you want to invest in a parking garage as part of economic development to help the city of Roswell's overall business economic development plan? If the question was, oh, you're going to pay for it as a when you go through, or the business is going to made the question more complex, splits up the intent of, is it part of economic development to have a parking garage? That's the question. Do you want to invest in it as a resident? That's the question. Through the public format, we will go through this process because, honestly, the council's divided on that very question. They've talked about it internally, and they don't agree on this. And my guess is that residents are not going to agree on this, and it's something that we'll have to settle ultimately if the parking garage gets passed. But there's good models on it. It's easy models to adopt. It depends. For example, Peter kind of touched on a public-private piece. There's so many ways this could go down. The question really depends on, do you want a parking garage in downtown, and are you willing to help invest money to make that happen? That's really the question. The other parts will be, hey, will it be free? I get to drive into it, and the business will be paying for it. Or, as Peter alluded to, if 85% of the people are coming outside Roswell, they're in downtown Canton Street, and 85% of the people don't live in Roswell, are they paying for it? I mean, honestly, that's a separate question, but it's a great question. Yes, sir.
So, hey, from a Parks and Recreation department, because I have a quick question, because obviously I'm a baseball guy. And so when you look at the parks now, and everything is turf, except your baseball fields. And so the problem that we have is that we have so many games canceled and so many opportunities canceled for young boys and girls, too, on the softball side to play games. I think the thing that we're missing right now is that why are we not looking for baseball to get turfed in the synthetic side, because we can totally change the revenue stream of everything we do, because I am physically understand the baseball side of it and how many, there's no, how do I say this? There's a lot of discourse right now between 8 and 12-year-old baseball, and that comes down to Cooperstown baseball. There's no fields for kids right now at 11 and 12-year-old to play on the fields that are 200 feet. You guys have a lot of 200 feet fields that we don't use, and that they're waterlogged, and we can't practice, and we can't play, and all of these things. If we could somehow figure out a way to enhance that, we could actually charge Perfect Game, East Cobb Baseball, all because Georgia is the hub of travel baseball. It just is. That's the way it is. And if we could somehow figure out a way to get those fields into the position where they could play every single weekend, the same way you guys do with lacrosse, the same way you guys do with football, we could totally enhance our ability as a community to increase our revenue from fields that we already have. The problem is that we can't get on because they're always wet, or if you get a rain or whatever, we get sold out. So the point is, can we somehow figure out a way to get those in this budget synthetically to give us the ability to play baseball in those fields, and also charge outside organizations to come and be a part of what we're doing?
Thank you, sir. Jeff?
Great question. The budget at Hembry Park includes the option to synthetic 2 of the fields. So we've built that capacity into that budget to be able to tackle at least 2 fields in conversation with the community. And I say it's capacity because there's still a kind of a policy question of making that conversion and where that sits with the community, with the board, and with others, and kind of where that stacks up. But we have included the provisions at Hembry Park to tackle that. The other thing that we've included in that space is, if you know where the maintenance shop is within Hembry, this mayor and council has already approved money for a batting cage at Hembry Park. As we're watching the bond question, there is also provisions to be able to move that complex over by the tennis courts and then actually put the batting cages right in the middle of all the fields. And so that is part of our planning effort there. If you've been in Hembry Park, it was built in the 90s. The grading is disastrous in that whole park. You know, the infield ends up in the parking lot whenever it rains. And so, just a second, and then we'll do a follow-up, is all of the fields will be regraded. All of the fields will include LED conversion. All of the fields will have new irrigation systems. All of them will be rebuilt, except essentially from the ground up, to fix all the drainage issues. It doesn't solve the rain out problem, but it dramatically improves it. And then, of course, the synthetic transition changes the conversation quite a bit. Yeah. Yep. Let's call them covered. Yes. Yep. Yep. So the question is will the batting cages, the hitting cages be covered? The answer is yes. That's how we've built in the budget capacity. The other thing that does is when we have practice rainouts, then it allows us to at least start to schedule hitting practice underneath covered pavilions to be able to get out there and still be able to play and practice. Yep. You bet.
Yes, sir.
Mayor, thank you. Man, I tell you what, I appreciate all my neighbors coming out tonight, and absolutely appreciate the council and staff. You guys are absolutely on overtime, and I appreciate it. I personally voted. I've already voted. Some of you may, but, we all know lots of people. And Dr. Vanstrom, if you may, the parking deck, some people had some questions about it, so for right now, I'll just kind of put the parking deck in the parking lot. So the other two bond referendums, police, fire, and parks, we have an opportunity of a lifetime here. Morthland talked about city shopping. When I came down here from Kentucky 30 years ago, finally got shoes when I got to Georgia. But I tell you what, that's what my wife and I did. We shopped for a city first. We looked at the parks, and in 30 years as a resident here in Roswell, this is finally some activity, some motion. And I think that's why we elected a new council, new faces, and a new mayor, is to get Roswell off the dime. And I think that the figures presented are reasonable. I think the tax increase, and I've seen some signs, no tax increase. I've even, I have the impression that former leaders of the city are like, oh no new taxes. This is an investment. I don't really look at it as a tax. And I think at the price, $340 a year, gosh, in this day and time, I certainly don't want to sound like an elitist, but $340 a year to have the amenities that we have here in Roswell, to have the first-class police department, fire protection. I hope that we all leave this meeting and vote however you want to, but I hope that there's a lot of people here that will go home, spread the word that, hey, you may have heard things about the bond issue. I went to an informational meeting, and I'm for it. And so I would encourage you to do that. And again, thank you all for the time. Mayor, thank you. Jeff Bolton, I'll turn it over to you. No, it's just
Thank you, David. By the way, I do a lot of things poor, and I think I answered your question poorly, because I could tell you, we want retail as much as you do. It's not a one-year answer. It's not. And so I can't tell you that we can wave that magic wand and that we can automatically make retail happen. But what I can tell you is we can systemically begin to change things. And that comes from macroeconomic intentional planning. That's why we created 4 economic pods. That's why we hired an economic development director. That's why we've activated a new development authority. That's why we brought Roswell Inc., the P3, into the fold on the economic planning. Because we want the same thing you want. We do want more retail activity. But you can't snap the fingers and fix 20 years of things going in one direction. You can begin to change the course of events, and I think we're doing that because we want the same thing that you want. We do want more retail activity, including on Canton Street. So, any other questions? Yes, sir.
I guess I disagree. I'm also from Kentucky, actually, and I think of this as absolutely a property tax. I think Roswell is already a great place to live. I don't think this is required to make it that much better. But I guess in light of all the money that you're looking to spend, have you looked at just reducing costs of the government to try and pay for some of these things, and instead of burdening us with a tremendous tax increase? I don't think it's an investment. I think it's a tremendous tax increase. Have you looked at other options? Thank you.
No. Thank you for the question. Ryan, I'm going to let you address this before I do, because I think that's fair, since you're the finance director.
Yes. So I'll start by saying that under this mayor and council, we are beginning a zero-based budgeting process. And we've kicked that off already, and we're going to be meeting, we started our budget process about 3 months earlier than we typically do for that very reason. And I think the intent behind that is to address exactly what you're saying, to make sure that we are doing the things inside, internally, that we need to do to make sure that we're using our tax dollars in the most wise way possible. I'll also point out that the city's taken steps in the last 4 months. The city paid off debt. So there were 2 pieces of debt that the city had. Our sales tax performed really well this year. The mayor and council made the decision to pay off debt in order to divert those operating resources to higher priority areas, like our full-time fire department, police pay, those types of things. So that's definitely on the radar, and is something that we're going to be looking at definitely in the next in time for our next budget, which starts next July.
I answered too many questions. I know you guys want to. Lee? Anybody? Christine?
In addition to zero-based budgeting, which we actually started partially this past year, we've done a lot of evaluations as to how to cut costs. So our IT department, as a matter of fact, was able to find close to $800,000 of savings. We did an energy audit, which we are going to recognize savings. So we're basically looking under every rock. We're looking how to be more efficient as an organization, and efficiency will drive savings as well. And that's what this team has come together to do under this mayor's leadership. It's incredible. I mean, I come from a consulting background, and basically we're running this like, the mayor is running this like a profitable, successful corporation should be run for the first time, probably ever.
So I think everybody agrees with you. There's nobody in this room that feels like they don't pay enough taxes. Nobody. I can tell you as a small business person, the amount of taxes I pay are onerous. They're onerous at the federal level. They're way too much at the state level. They're insane at the county level. Insane at the county level. And yes, you have elected us to make your government more efficient. You've elected us to deliver more services better, more efficiently, and to do things better for the least amount of money. And, well, so the 2 structural questions answer. So we're very aware of that. There is not, everybody here is a hawk on spending. Not, hey, let's jack it up just for the sake of jacking it up. I will share with you a little secret. In the world of government, there's something, budgeting is always incremental budgeting. What that means is past budget is the past budget, and you build upon that. That is the way it is. State level, federal level, of course, county level, and city level, across our land. So when we came in January, we didn't have enough time to do zero-based budgeting. But what we did do was, for FY23, is we did priority-based budgeting on all new expenditures. So any new expenditure that was submitted by department heads underneath the leadership of Randy had to be prioritized and had to be justified in a dramatically different way. We also began to initiate the process, which sounds like a small thing, which is probably the single most important thing to me, is zero-based budgeting. Because Roswell is going to be a unique government in this country when it actually delivers zero-based budgeting on an ongoing basis. It's a fancy way of saying that you start at zero in every department, and that the council, your elected leadership, has to make hard decisions about priority spending. So I don't want to be, what's the word when you're irresponsible? I don't want to be irresponsible and say, we're going to deliver $12 million to you because of zero-based budgeting. But I do believe that we are going to deliver some money to you. It's going to be more efficient. But I can't make up $75 million deferred maintenance. I can't create $35 million for a river master plan. The bike and pedestrian plan's $180 million. We have figured out how to spend $20 million of that in a critical way that'll make a difference to the city. I can't make that up in the budget. I can't do it. Nobody can do that. I can't make up. By the way, all of us know this. When you have an asset, you have to plan to replace that asset. We've never done that. So these fire departments are replacing assets that no money has been set aside to replace those assets. That's what this is about. The $20 million public safety building is combining forces. It's actually taking $6 million for a 911 center, a couple $1 million for an operations center, $20 million easily for a police and fire safety, and say, nope, all you got is $20 million. We're going to make it happen. Big numbers, I know. But I want to tell you that there is a real physical, conservative approach to this. We take this deadly serious. Parking garage, that's why you saw the P3 option on there. $25,000. A lot of work went into that. So I hear you loud and clear. I think everybody in the room hears you loud and clear. I think all residents hear you loud and clear. We don't like having our taxes increased. And that's why this council said, these are bonds. You're going to make the decision. You make the decision. But understand, I hope that we're being incredibly responsible bringing this to you. It's not willy-nilly. It's, oh, you know what? We need to spend $180 million. No. This is an investment in the city. So, other questions? Because I see it's 6:42. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
It's a statement. We have already voted, and we voted for all three of them, and I feel like we got a bargain.
Thank you, sir. Well, I can't thank you enough for being here. I apologize for having to be rude and to shut it down, and we're going to run out the door because we got to be in City Hall in 17 minutes. So I thank you all for being here. God bless. Thank you.